The life of Jesus was unlike any other. Wherever he went, lives were changed, and the ordinary became extraordinary. His words carried authority that stirred hearts, but his miracles revealed something even greater: heaven touching earth in visible, undeniable ways. Blind eyes opened, storms grew calm, bread multiplied, and even the dead returned to life. These were not hidden events whispered in secret, but living moments witnessed by men, women, and children whose lives could never be the same again. Miracles were not performed for entertainment, nor as passing wonders meant to impress. They were signs filled with meaning, showing God's power and his love reaching into human need. When Jesus healed the sick, it was not only the body that was restored, but the heart and dignity of the person. When he calmed storms, it was not only waves that grew still, but fear that gave way to peace. Every miracle declared that God had drawn near, and his kingdom was breaking into the present moment. Crowds followed him because they longed for more than words. They longed for hope. Some carried the sick on mats, others traveled long distances with nothing but faith that something would happen. And time after time, they left amazed. Not because of rumor or myth, but because they themselves had tasted bread that never ran out, had seen lame men walk, or had heard the cries of joy when a loved one was restored. These events were undeniable. Even opponents who tried to silence him could not erase the evidence standing before them. People once blind who now saw, men once crippled who now stood strong, women once hopeless who now rejoiced in freedom. The miracles demanded a response, for they pointed to a truth far greater than the moment itself. They pointed to the presence of God revealed in his Son. The story of Jesus' miracles continues to inspire today, reminding us that the same God who worked then still moves in the world now. Each testimony calls us to faith, to hope, and to trust that no situation is beyond his reach. They are not simply accounts of the past, but living invitations for us to believe in the present. If you enjoy these kinds of films and want to hear more about the powerful miracles of Jesus and their meaning for us today, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Click like to show your support and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps spread these messages further so that many more can be encouraged and strengthened in their faith. The wedding in Cana was a moment filled with joy and celebration, yet it carried an unexpected turn that could have ended in embarrassment. A shortage of wine threatened to bring shame upon the hosts, something considered deeply dishonorable in their culture. Into this delicate moment, Jesus revealed his glory in a way both quiet and profound, leaving an impression on those who witnessed it. Mary, his mother, turned to him with confidence, presenting the concern. Her words to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you," revealed her trust that he would act, even though he had not yet performed a public miracle. What followed was subtle yet extraordinary. 6 stone jars, normally used for ritual purification, were filled with water, only to be drawn out as wine of the finest quality. The master of the banquet, unaware of what had taken place, marveled that the best wine had been kept until the end. The servants, however, knew the truth of what had been poured into the jars. The disciples, too, saw in this moment more than a solution to a social problem. They recognized a sign of divine presence, and their faith in him deepened. The transformation of water into wine carried rich meaning. It was not merely about refreshment for guests, but about joy overflowing where it had run dry. In that setting of covenant and union, wine became a symbol of abundance, and the miracle signaled that something greater had arrived. Where emptiness threatened, fullness now reigned. Where lack was near, abundance overflowed. This first sign was not about spectacle. Unlike later miracles witnessed by large crowds, this one was known only to a few. Yet it set the tone for what his ministry would bring. It was about transformation, about the ordinary becoming extraordinary when touched by his power. It was about revealing that God's kingdom brings joy greater than what had been known before. The use of purification jars was no accident. They represented the old patterns of ritual cleansing, traditions that prepared people outwardly but could not transform inwardly. By filling these jars with something new, Jesus was showing that he had come to bring a greater cleansing, one not based on ritual, but on renewal of the heart. The water that once washed hands now became wine that gladdened hearts. For the disciples, this miracle was unforgettable. They had left their lives behind to follow him, uncertain of what they would see. In Cana, they were given the first sign that their faith was not misplaced. It was not only about what he did, but about who he was. This was the beginning of glory being revealed in ways no one could deny. The wedding at Cana stands as a reminder that when Christ is present, lack becomes abundance, and ordinary moments become extraordinary. Those who witnessed it could never again see a jar of water without remembering the wine it once became. That first sign of glory opened the path to many more, each revealing the truth that in him, life itself is transformed. Everywhere Jesus went, the sick were brought to him. Villages stirred with expectation as people carried loved ones who could not walk, who could not see, who had been broken by disease for years. These were not hidden afflictions, but conditions known by entire communities. When healing came, it was undeniable. For those who once lived in suffering now stood whole in the presence of neighbors who had watched their struggles for years. The blind opened their eyes to light they had never seen. Imagine the astonishment of a man who had lived in darkness from birth, suddenly describing colors, faces, and landscapes he had never known. Such a transformation could not be questioned, for the community had known him well. The lame who had been carried on mats now carried those very mats themselves, their steps strong and steady. The deaf, once cut off from the sounds of life, suddenly heard voices and songs, their expressions filled with wonder. These miracles spoke of compassion as much as power. Jesus did not pass by suffering with indifference. He stopped for the beggar crying out on the roadside. He touched the leper no one else would touch. He spoke tenderly to the woman who trembled after being healed. His power was inseparable from his mercy. Healing was not only the restoration of bodies, but the lifting of despair and the restoration of dignity. Crowds who witnessed these moments could not deny what they saw. A paralyzed man lowered through a roof walked out before them. A woman who had been bent over for years straightened her back and glorified God in the synagogue. 10 lepers stood cleansed where once their bodies had been ravaged. These were public testimonies, seen in real time, impossible to dismiss. Healing also revealed his authority beyond human ability. Physicians might ease pain, but no one could restore sight to the blind or give strength to wasted limbs with a word. These moments showed that his authority extended into every corner of human brokenness. In him, suffering yielded to wholeness. Skeptics could argue about his teachings, but they could not erase the living witnesses of his power. A healed man walking through a village was more persuasive than any debate. Communities rejoiced not only in the restored health of individuals, but in the undeniable truth that God's power was among them. These healings pointed forward to something greater. Each one was a sign of the kingdom of God, breaking into the present world, a glimpse of a future where sickness and pain would be no more. They were not isolated acts of compassion, but foretastes of a greater restoration that awaits. The healing touch of Jesus left behind more than amazement. It left testimonies carved into the lives of real people, testimonies that spread through towns and villages and could not be silenced. The sick rose again, and witnesses knew they had seen the hand of God. One of the most unforgettable moments in his ministry came on a hillside where thousands gathered. They had come for his words and lingered for his presence, but the day grew long and hunger spread among the crowd. The disciples urged him to send them away to find food, for what could be done with such a multitude in a remote place. Yet Jesus had a different plan, one that would reveal provision beyond human measure. A boy's small offering of 5 loaves and 2 fish was brought forward. In human terms, it was insignificant, barely enough for one family, certainly not for thousands. Yet in his hands, small became abundant. He blessed the loaves, broke them, and gave them to his disciples to distribute. To their astonishment, the bread did not run out, the fish did not diminish, and the people ate until they were satisfied. Imagine the crowd experiencing this moment. Families receiving bread, breaking it, passing it on, and finding that it multiplied as it moved from hand to hand. Children who began the day hungry ate their fill. Parents who worried about their families' needs left carrying food that had overflowed. By the end, 12 baskets remained, one for each disciple, as if to show them personally that his provision always exceeded their expectation. This miracle carried a message of trust. The disciples had calculated scarcity, counting what little they had and concluding it was not enough. Jesus showed them that the measure of provision was not in their resources, but in his hands. What seemed small became sufficient, and what seemed insufficient became abundant. The crowd itself was undeniable testimony. Thousands had seen the 5 loaves at the beginning, thousands had eaten from the multiplied bread, and thousands left filled. No rumor could match the reality of so many witnesses, each carrying their own memory of bread that multiplied before their eyes. This event also pointed to a deeper truth. Bread is not only food, but a symbol of life itself. By providing bread in such abundance, Jesus revealed himself as the one who sustains, who nourishes not only bodies, but souls. Later, he would speak of himself as the bread of life, pointing to a provision that satisfies the deepest hunger of the human heart. For the disciples, the miracle was more than an act of generosity. It was a lesson in surrender. What they placed into his hands multiplied beyond measure, teaching them that their calling was not to provide everything themselves, but to trust him with what little they had. The feeding of the multitudes stands as one of the most undeniable miracles, witnessed by thousands and remembered in detail. It was a declaration that in Christ, scarcity becomes abundance, hunger becomes satisfaction, and bread never runs out. The Sea of Galilee was known for sudden storms, and for fishermen who spent their lives on its waters, danger was familiar. Yet one night, when winds howled and waves threatened to sink the boat, the disciples faced fear greater than their experience could manage. Amid the chaos, Jesus slept undisturbed by the storm that terrified seasoned sailors. Desperation drove them to wake him, crying that they were perishing. He rose and spoke not to them, but to the wind and the waves. With a rebuke and a command, the storm ceased, and calm settled instantly over the waters. The disciples, stunned into silence, whispered among themselves, "Who is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" What they had witnessed was more than power. It was authority over creation itself. This was not the only time nature bowed to him. Another night the disciples struggled against heavy winds, only to see him walking toward them on the water. Fear seized them, thinking they had seen a spirit, yet his voice reassured them, and Peter, bold for a moment, stepped out to walk toward him. Though fear caused him to sink, the hand of Jesus pulled him up, and together they returned to the boat, the winds ceasing once again. These events revealed his identity in unmistakable ways. Nature itself responded to his presence. Storms that threatened to consume vanished at his word. Waters that could not hold men carried his steps. For those who witnessed, no explanation could soften the truth. They were standing before one whose authority stretched beyond the limits of the natural world. The disciples carried these memories with them, memories that anchored their faith when storms of another kind arose. They had seen waves bow and winds obey. They had felt terror turn to awe in a single moment. No argument could strip away what their own eyes had seen, what their own ears had heard, and what their own hearts had experienced. The calming of storms revealed more than raw power. It revealed peace. In a world where chaos often reigns, his presence brought stillness. For frightened sailors, it was life preserved. For those who later remembered, it was a testimony that even in the fiercest storm, he remains sovereign. Witnesses knew these were not tricks or illusions. Storms cannot be staged, winds cannot be faked, and seas do not calm themselves on command. What they saw was real, and it left them asking questions that carried only one answer, that the Creator himself was in their midst. When storms obeyed, awe replaced fear, and faith took root in deeper soil. The disciples who trembled in boats came to realize they were not merely following a teacher or prophet, but the one whom even nature could not resist. Few moments in the ministry of Jesus struck witnesses with greater awe than when life returned, where death had already claimed victory. Death, the final boundary of human existence, seemed immovable, yet in his presence it yielded. For families grieving their deepest loss, the impossible became reality, and entire communities stood stunned at what their eyes had seen. One such moment occurred when Jairus, a synagogue leader, pleaded for his dying daughter. Before they arrived at his home, news came that she had already passed away. Grief filled the house, mourners wept, and hope seemed lost. Yet Jesus declared that she was not gone forever, but only sleeping. Taking her by the hand, he spoke words that called her back to life. The child rose, walked, and ate, leaving her parents overwhelmed with astonishment and joy. Another day in the town of Nain, a funeral procession carried the only son of a widow through the streets. Her sorrow was not only for her child, but for her future. For without him, she faced a life of loneliness and vulnerability. Jesus was moved with compassion. He touched the bier, and the procession halted. Speaking to the lifeless young man, he called him to rise. Breath returned, life filled his body, and he sat up and began to speak. The crowd was seized with fear and wonder, and the story spread throughout the region. The most dramatic of these moments came with Lazarus. For 4 days he had lain in the tomb. His sisters, Mary and Martha, grieved with friends who had gathered. When Jesus arrived, Martha declared that if he had come earlier, her brother would not have died. Yet Jesus revealed a greater truth, saying, "I am the resurrection and the life." Standing before the tomb, he prayed and then cried out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" To the shock of everyone present, Lazarus emerged, bound in grave clothes yet alive once again. These events carried deep significance. They were not only demonstrations of power, but revelations of his authority over death itself. For those who believed, it was confirmation that the one who could raise the dead had brought life stronger than the grave. For those who doubted, the evidence stood before them in living form. Once lifeless bodies now moving, speaking, and embracing loved ones again. Witnesses could not deny what they had seen. Funerals that began in mourning ended in celebration. Villages that prepared for grief erupted in joy. Families who had said farewell were suddenly reunited. The weight of these events left people speaking of them for years to come, unable to forget the day when the impossible bowed before his voice. These miracles also pointed toward the ultimate victory that would come. Each raising was a signpost leading to the truth that death itself would not hold the final word. What took place in Jairus' home, on the streets of Nain, and at the tomb of Lazarus foreshadowed the greatest miracle of all, the resurrection of Jesus himself. The raising of the dead revealed not only power, but compassion, for in every case grief was met with mercy. Tears were turned into joy, despair into hope, and finality into a new beginning. Life had returned, and those who stood by knew they had witnessed something no human power could ever achieve. The ministry of Jesus was marked not only by healings and provisions, but also by confrontations with forces of darkness. People oppressed by demonic spirits lived lives of torment, cut off from community and consumed by fear. Into such bondage, his word brought freedom, and witnesses could not deny the transformations they saw. One man lived among tombs, bound by chains that could not hold him, driven by forces that tormented his mind and body. He cried out night and day, frightening all who came near. When Jesus stepped onto the shore, the spirits within the man recognized him immediately. With a word of command, the legion that held him captive departed. Moments later, the man who had been feared by all sat clothed and in his right mind, astonishing those who had long known his condition. In synagogues too, demonic voices cried out when Jesus spoke, unable to remain silent in his presence. With authority, he silenced them and cast them out, leaving those gathered in awe. People marveled, not only at the healings they had seen, but at the authority he carried over unseen powers that no one else could control. Eyewitnesses were struck by the immediacy of these changes. Those once violent became peaceful, those once incoherent spoke clearly, those once enslaved were free. No explanation could be offered except that a greater power had entered the scene, a power that commanded obedience from forces no human strength could tame. For the people of that time, possession was not a matter of superstition, but a terrifying reality. Families lived in fear of loved ones who were not themselves. Communities struggled with those cut off by unseen torment. To see such oppression end instantly was more than a miracle. It was liberation, the restoration of lives stolen by darkness. These acts also revealed his identity. Evil recognized him before many people did. The spirits trembled and confessed what others had not yet fully understood, that he was the Son of God. Their obedience to his word revealed that no power of darkness could stand against him. Witnesses could not deny what they saw. The very people they had avoided, feared, or restrained now stood before them transformed. Entire regions spread the news, for the evidence was visible in lives completely changed. Fear gave way to amazement and resistance to belief. The authority of Jesus over darkness revealed that the kingdom of God is not only about healing the body or feeding the hungry, but about breaking chains of spiritual oppression. Where he spoke, freedom came. Where he commanded, darkness fled. Those who saw these transformations knew that a power greater than any they had known was at work before their eyes. While the power of Jesus was limitless, faith often played a central role in the unfolding of miracles. Time after time, people who believed, even with the smallest measure of faith, found themselves recipients of extraordinary works. The connection between trust and transformation became clear, and witnesses learned that faith opened doors that doubt could never unlock. A woman who had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding pressed through a crowd just to touch the edge of his garment. She believed that even the smallest contact would bring healing. When she touched him, she felt her body restored instantly. Trembling, she confessed before all what she had done, and Jesus affirmed her, saying her faith had made her whole. The crowd, who had seen her suffering for years, now saw her freed in a single moment. A Roman centurion came on behalf of his servant who lay paralyzed. He declared that Jesus did not need to enter his home, but only to speak the word, and his servant would be healed. Such confidence astonished Jesus, who praised his faith and granted his request. At that very hour, the servant recovered, confirming that the centurion's trust was not misplaced. The story of the friends who lowered a paralyzed man through the roof also revealed the power of faith. Unable to reach Jesus because of the crowd, they broke through barriers literally to bring their friend before him. Their determination was recognized, and the man was not only healed, but also forgiven. The crowd marveled, both at his physical restoration and at the authority Jesus displayed. Faith did not need to be large, only genuine. Even when a desperate father cried out, "I believe, help my unbelief," his plea was met with compassion, and his child was healed. These encounters showed that faith is not about perfection, but about trust, however small, placed in the right one. Witnesses could not ignore the connection. Time and again, those who reached out in faith found themselves transformed, while those who rejected or doubted saw nothing. The miracles confirmed that faith was the key that unlocked what God was ready to give. For communities, these moments taught that faith is not a private matter only, but something that could stir entire crowds to hope. When one person reached out and was healed, many more were encouraged to do the same. The ripple of belief spread, drawing countless others to seek the same touch. The relationship between faith and miracles revealed that God does not force himself upon anyone, but delights to respond to trust. Where faith opened the door, the miraculous stepped through, leaving behind undeniable testimonies of what belief can bring. All the miracles of Jesus pointed toward a single climactic event, his resurrection. While many had seen healings, provisions, and even the raising of others from death, nothing compared to the moment when he himself rose after being crucified and buried. This was not a private vision, not a hidden moment, but a reality witnessed by disciples, followers, and even skeptics. On the third day after his crucifixion, the tomb where he had been laid was found empty. Women who had come with spices to anoint his body discovered the stone rolled away. They encountered angels declaring that he had risen, and soon after, he appeared to them in person. Their sorrow turned instantly to joy, and they ran to tell the others. At first, the disciples struggled to believe. Fear and doubt filled their hearts, even though he had foretold what would happen. Yet he appeared among them, speaking peace, showing the wounds in his hands and side, and eating with them to prove he was no ghost. Their disbelief dissolved into astonishment, and their mourning became unshakable joy. Over the days that followed, he appeared to many. 2 disciples walking on the road to Emmaus found themselves speaking with him before recognizing who he was. By the sea, he cooked breakfast for his followers. On a mountain, he commissioned them to go into all the world. At one point, he was seen by hundreds at once. These appearances were undeniable, leaving a vast number of eyewitnesses who could not deny what they had seen. The resurrection was the ultimate proof of his authority. Death itself, the final enemy, had been defeated. Those who had seen him crucified now saw him alive, standing, speaking, and moving among them. It was not a vision or a dream, but a living reality that reshaped history forever. For his followers, the resurrection became the foundation of their faith. They no longer feared death, for they had seen it overcome. They no longer doubted his words, for everything he had promised had come true. The transformation in their lives was undeniable. They went from hiding in fear to boldly proclaiming the message, even in the face of persecution. Skeptics could not erase the evidence. The empty tomb stood as silent testimony. The changed lives of his disciples spoke louder than arguments. The spread of the message across the world was fueled by witnesses who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, yet proclaimed boldly that they had seen him alive. The resurrection remains the greatest miracle, not only because it defied death, but because it opened the way for eternal life. All other miracles pointed to this moment, and all who saw it knew they had witnessed something history could never erase. Victory over the grave had come, and it changed everything. The miracles of Jesus were not ancient legends hidden in the dust of time, nor were they stories meant only for those who lived 2,000 years ago. They were living testimonies, moments where heaven broke into earth, and their echoes continue to speak with power even now. Each miracle carried a message that transcended the moment in which it happened, a message that still calls hearts to faith and hope today. When water became wine, it was more than a solution at a wedding. It was a sign of transformation, the kind that takes what is ordinary and makes it extraordinary. That truth still resonates, reminding people that their lives, though simple or broken, can be renewed and filled with joy beyond measure. It whispers even now that what may seem empty can be filled with abundance when placed in His hands. When the sick were healed, communities saw compassion that did not overlook the suffering. Those same testimonies remind the world today that God is not distant from pain. He sees, He cares, and He restores. The stories of the blind receiving sight and the lame walking are not only accounts of physical miracles, but declarations that hope is never lost, even in moments of deepest despair. When thousands were fed with a few loaves and fish, it was not just about bread, it was about provision that never runs dry. That miracle speaks still, reminding hearts that scarcity does not have the final word, and that God delights in providing more than enough. In times of fear or lack, the memory of overflowing baskets continues to inspire trust. When storms obeyed His voice, it showed that chaos and fear are not beyond His command. That same truth echoes into the storms of life people face today, moments of uncertainty, trials and fear that threaten to overwhelm. The memory of waters made still reminds every heart that peace is possible even in the fiercest storm, because the one who spoke to the wind still reigns. When the dead were raised, it was not only families who rejoiced, but entire communities who knew they had witnessed life stronger than death. Those miracles pointed toward the resurrection that followed, the victory that continues to be the foundation of Christian faith. The reality that life triumphed over death still speaks powerfully today, offering hope that the grave does not have the final word. When darkness was cast out and people oppressed by forces beyond their control were set free, the witnesses stood amazed. Those moments remind the world even now that no chain is too strong, no darkness too deep, no bondage too unbreakable. Freedom is possible, and the authority that silenced demons still holds power over every form of oppression. Faith, woven throughout each of these miracles, remains the key. The woman who touched His garment, the centurion who trusted His word, the friends who carried their companion through the roof, all remind us that trust, even small and fragile, opens the way for God's power to move. Their stories still invite hearts today to believe, to hope, and to reach out with expectation. Above all, the resurrection stands as the greatest miracle, the one that defines all others. It was not hidden in secrecy, but witnessed by many, and its message continues to shape lives across generations. Death was defeated, life was secured, and history itself was changed. That truth still calls out today, offering hope that is unshakable and life that is eternal. The miracles of Jesus still speak because they were never just about the events themselves. They were signs of God's love, power, and presence. They were glimpses of a kingdom breaking into the world, a kingdom that still moves among us, transforming hearts and lives. The testimonies of the past continue to echo into the present, reminding us that the same God who worked then still works today. The miracles of Jesus were undeniable, witnessed by crowds and remembered for generations, and they remain living testimonies that continue to inspire faith today. They show that God is not distant, that He meets us in our needs, that He transforms what is broken, and that His power is greater than anything we face. If this message has encouraged you, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss future videos. Like this film, to help others discover it, leave a comment below to share your thoughts or your own experiences of faith. And share this video with your family and friends so they too can be uplifted by the truth of these miracles.